standards to live up to in terms of how do you determine the future of a community. When it comes to a planning process, it's a little bit of the same way, where there's a sort of a bare minimum requirement. And for a master plan to get approved for your neighborhood, what you have to do is you have to have a public meeting. You have to talk to the council member. You have to look at things like land use. So the subject of the plan is very detailed. You have to look at land uses. You have to look at transportation. You have to look at open space and all those things. And you have to advertise. So your public meeting, you have to get the word out. You have to do that. Now, other than that, you don't have to do much. Now, that doesn't mean you should settle for that, and I don't think we do, and we haven't. So, so the other side of that, though, is even though the standards are high, you then have to ask yourself, okay, well, how do we know when we've really engaged people, and what's the right amount? And I don't know that there's an answer to that. I don't know what the number is. I don't know what the percentage is. But what I do know is that decisions are getting made, and funding opportunities exist, and what a community should do is just do your best. Do your best to tell people that we're going through a process. Do your best to get the word out. Leverage your existing communication infrastructure. If you've got emails, use the emails. If it's a website, use that. For this process, we did all of that. We did posters, and we put them up in businesses on the commercial district. We put them out on some of the streets, and we did that. We got on Twitter, we got on Facebook. And all I know to do is to just use as much of those platforms as you can to tell people what you're doing. And then whatever you get is what you get. Because if you decide that you're not going to plan, then the bond is getting ready to get issued. $300 million. And if you're a master plan, you get access to that. And if you're not, you don't. So I don't want you to sit and decide we're going to just sit that out, because for the next 10 years, that is the funding stream for the things you want to do. And if you're not in it, it's going to be very hard. And so all I know to do is let's do more than the city requires. Let's be creative. Let's be tireless and use the infrastructure that the neighborhood has to get the word out. And that's what we've done. We've had 2 public meetings. We had a website that was up for a month, just getting feedback before we ever got started. It's still going. It's still getting the word out. It's still getting input. All of that input's in the plan. And let's just find the consensus we can find. Let's work within the framework of what the city is going to allow. And let's just move it. Let's move this neighborhood just a little bit forward. Is this the ultimate plan that's going to last you for 50 years? No. This will probably have about a 5 to 10 year shelf life. And of all the things that are in it, you're going to go hard after maybe 5 or 6 of them and get them done in the next 5 years. And then it's always good to just come back and do it again and tweak it and revise it. And that's what we're doing. And just taking an opportunity to go on record with whoever we can get into the process. I will say, compared to other neighborhoods, this has been really good. And so that's kind of, I see that 2 ways. That's kind of good and bad. I think there should be 500 people at a meeting. I mean, I think that should happen. That just doesn't.
Is there any reason though why you wouldn't put it out to the neighbor? I mean, you've got obviously a lot of engaged people here.
Mm-hmm.
A small subset that have come out to this meeting. People that have come out, I think it was 30 people who were listed in the master plan as having been part of the focus groups.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty small number compared to the total overall number of people in the neighborhood.
Right.
Any reason why, through those facilities that we have, that you shouldn't solicit people in the neighborhood that have an interest in expressing an opinion, to not just get that informal feedback, but to actually have people have the ability to vote? And that's not so much necessarily a question for you, but that's more of a question for the board.
Well, no, I think we did that. I don't think there's anyone who was involved, whether it was the board or the steering committee, or that didn't get the word out. And but that's
30 people out of.
Well, I can answer where those 30 people came from. We put out like, hey, we're doing this. Anyone interested, please contact us. We did put it out to the neighborhood and to everyone, and people who volunteered, they, of course, were kept on the list and kept informed throughout the whole process.
And Jesse's right, we invited people, we told people what the focus groups were, what the topics were, invited people who were interested in specific topics to contact us, to be a part of the focus group. But I think the plan is on the website now, and people can comment on every single element. I mean, you can have an opportunity to say 4.6 design guidelines. I think this is a terrible idea. 4.7 utilities. Bury the utilities underground. Everyone thinks that's a good idea. You know, there's an opportunity to provide input and comment on every single thing.
Is your concern that if you disagree with one of these concepts, that it's already been de facto approved, kind of? Is
No,
that-
not necessarily. I perfectly believe that there are some number of things that I don't agree with where I'm in the minority, and that's perfectly fine. From what's gone back and forth on a lot of the social media, I think there are a number of people that have been engaged in the process that would like the ability to actually have a vote on something that's this
Something
important.
more formal?
Yeah, formally yes or no, to be able to say, of the 6,000 or whatever the number of neighborhoods, or I'm sorry, households there are in this neighborhood, to be able to say formally, yes, I agree on this part of it, so that they could say, to your point, Jennifer, there are however many number of individual items in that plan, to be able to formally say yes or no to each one of those, so that there would be a tally of everyone in the neighborhood that would provide formal feedback in the process. Now, not everybody's going to vote, I understand that, but there's plenty of time before we would miss out the opportunity to actually get into that process for that funding, to let that happen and still meet the timelines that are outlined in that plan.
Well, let me ask Aaron this.
And with the plan on the website, everybody in the neighborhood has the opportunity to go through the information presented, to really understand each of the recommendations and how it fits with other plans and the opportunity it opens up, and to provide feedback on each individual item in the plan that is not feedback designed to take us out of the running for future funding, but is feedback designed to refine the plan before it goes to a final vote. And that's what the neighborhood, what everybody who lives in the neighborhood is being offered through the website. An opportunity to understand it, to study it, to read it, and to provide formal, written, will be considered by the planner before the final plan, and will be documented in the plan, input. So we're not offering you an up or down vote. I mean, we're not trying to be as effective as we're not trying to be as effective as the Senate. We're trying to develop something thoughtful and useful.
I'll answer
And
the
that's
question.
what-
I don't mind answering it at all, because Virginia-Highland has like many, many neighborhoods and many forms of government here, has a representation, has a representative system. And it's worked by and large extremely well for this neighborhood for 40 years. And in fact, you have a tremendous opportunity to vote up or down on every individual on this board come next September, and to replace every single person here if you think that they
We
need.
don't need a lecture from somebody in the front row who's been talking way too much during this meeting.
Excuse me.
You have questions?
No, hang on one
One
second.
question in this room, you've had enough time to talk the entire meeting. One of my questions here is, during this process, there's been at least 1,500 ideas that came out on the website. Wonderful ideas. How many of those are going to get whittled down? As you say, this is probably going to be a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. We're probably only going to get 3 to 5 things done. How many recommendations are we going to have for those top 5 or top 8? Because obviously you can't have 1,500 things that people want to do. How do you get to those top 5 or top 8?
Right. How do you want to, I just want to make sure we're moving forward the way you want to.
Well, before we get to that, I didn't want to close the loop on the question that was raised here, and I wanted to ask you, Aaron, in the other master plan processes that you've been through, have there been votes on each section of a plan?
No, no, I don't know. Yeah, I think that gets, from an implementation standpoint, it gets a little bit difficult. It's, I mean, there's a lot of things in the plan, and you could vote on anything with that kind of a format. You know, I think.
How many actual recommendations? I know there's 142 pages now.
Right.
The last one that came out, there were 17 pages, and I think there were a very finite number of recommendations in there. How many actual recommendations are there in that 142 pages?
It's probably maybe 75 or something like that.
So we went from some small number up to 75 between.
Well,
January-
No, the recommendations are
trying
on
to
page
understand.
90, start on page 96. And the recommendations are in various categories, and,
But they
I mean, you
increased
just need to
from
look
last
at it.
section.
Like, section 1 is healthy living, and it goes from section
Yeah, I mean,
1.1.
let me clarify. The last time there was, to simplify through just the meeting we had, there was 14 posters, but each one, some of them had 10 things on them.
There were multiple, right, in the 17 pages.
Right, so it's not necessarily more than the last meeting.
No, I mean, I tried to read it before, and I didn't come out until I started reading it, so.
That's right. We're in the same boat.
Right. I'm just trying to, not say that it hasn't happened before, I'm just trying to understand if there's a reluctance to giving people the opportunity to have that yes or no on each of the items in here, because I think there are, if we're gonna have a limited ability to get funds out of that, what is 300 million, I mean, we're one of any number of neighborhoods in the city, it would seem that it would be important enough for us to want to weigh in on, okay, I agree with some of this, but not others, and then have people be able to very clearly say, yes, this is what the neighborhood as a whole recommends, and at least give that information to the board, so that you can have that very clearly as you're making your decision.
Actually, I think that would be a splendid idea in theory. In reality, I'm not quite sure how much more democratic or useful or accurate it is than any other subsection that you might have 15 people here. 1 second, we'll get to you. 15 people to do that versus 25 or 30. I mean, we wish there were 500 people here too. We all do. And we've done every single thing we can think of to get the word out. I mean, literally every single thing short of I don't know, handing in naked people waving signs at Virginia-Highland. I think we're going to get a huge number of comments, and I think the broad consensuses that will result with the comments about where there's dissent will actually represent pretty accurately what the neighborhood thinks. And I do think that realistically, at some point you make a decision, and you do it with the people that you've elected to office, as imperfect and flawed as they all are, and not because they're smarter than anybody else, it's just because eventually that's the way it works. Rob Pitts was here tonight, he didn't get 3% he probably didn't get 15% of the people eligible to vote for him, even voted for him. That's the people that voted, they just picked him. And does he represent the majority? Well, he's the representative, and that's at some point, that's just the way you do it for efficiency. We can talk about this.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting idea, and it's also hard to pull off.
Understood.
Very hard to pull off and know that you did it in a way that got that input. But we're all interested in having it be as representative as it could be and knowing what people think. So, I mean, I'll be glad to talk to you if there's some cool, clever way to do that. I think we'd all be willing to hear it. So,
Well, going to that point.
yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Not half a block from here, and a member of our neighborhood is Beth Shapiro, who runs a preeminent polling and survey company in the area, who I'm sure would be happy to put together a plan for you to do phone calls, door-to-door canvassing, to easily vote on all of these issues as a neighborhood, as opposed to just as 11 people.
Well, you might. I understand that would get a greater number of response. There's an equal argument made on the other side of that, which is the people that care the most have come out here, have invested their time, or at this meeting will answer on the website, will take the time to plow through the laborious set of recommendations. I'm sorry.
Well, that's happening anyway.
Well, no. I mean, there's a real question as to who you want. That's the defense of the representative system that we hear. The people that cared enough to pay attention to do it went out and gave the input, and that's maybe who you want to hear from the most. In any case, we'll take it under, I think really, I'm willing to talk about it. I think we all are willing to consider it. I think it's time to wrap.
Yes, it's time to wrap up for
What
sure.
about this last question? The priorities question. Which was
Okay. So what we will do is we will, in the next draft, we will just add a reflection of a sense of priorities because of all of the 75 or 80 recommendations. You can't do all of them in a year or maybe even 5 years, but also some of the recommendations are very simple Some of the recommendations you can do, other recommendations are going to take funding from the city and partnership with the city. So what we're going to do in the last draft is we're just going to reflect at the very end a sense of what your priorities could be. And that'll just take into account what the city has money to do, what are going to be those low-hanging fruit. We're going to focus on the bond because the bond is coming up and there will be a limited amount of funding that you will be eligible for, but you will be eligible for it. And we want to help you know, given what we heard through the process, here's what looks to be the priority projects. So we'll reflect that sort of prioritization in the upcoming draft.
So I think it's getting late, we'll need to end the questions there, but I'm going to read a comment from a very kind person. Just wanted to express my thanks to our neighborhood leaders for taking on these important issues. Dialogue is important, and you'll hear a lot of unhappy voices. This voice simply says, thank you for your leadership. So, to the kind person